Welcome to Left on Red, where a Gen X mom and gay millennial do socialism.
We've got left-wing views on news you can use.
I'm Scott.
I'm Susan.
And today we are here with two Hudson Valley Democratic Socialists of America candidates for elected office.
City Council and Common Council, respectively, in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie. So we'll let you introduce yourself first. Giselle, tell us about yourself.
My name is Giselle Martinez, and I represent the First Ward in the city of Newburgh. We are about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on traffic, away from Poughkeepsie. And I was the first socialist elected to the city council here in the city of Newburgh. And I was also the youngest. I was elected at 23 years old. I had just turned 23 when I was elected. And so it's been a journey. And since I've been on the council, I've been able to really work with my colleagues to push for housing, tenant rights, environmental justice. And we've been fighting for the working class families here. So I'll pass it over to Dan.
Hi everyone, Daniel Altonna, he, him. I am running for City of Poughkeepsie Common Council in Ward 8, which is like the southeast corner of the city of Poughkeepsie. It's basically just the city council. I don't know the history of why we call it a common council, but that's just what we call it here. So I'm in Dutchess County. Giselle and Newburgh is over in Orange County on opposite sides of the Hudson River. I live and grew up in Poughkeepsie, Ward 8, in a working class immigrant family. My family lost our home during the Great Recession, and we kind of bounced all around the Hudson Valley for a while. We were even homeless for a little while, and it took us 14 years to get back to the neighborhood where I grew up. But now I'm back, and I'm back fighting for a Poughkeepsie that works for all of us, and that's why I'm running. And a Poughkeepsie, right, that puts Poughkeepsie over profit, and that's actually it got a slogan drop. So really determined to orient city government towards policies that help working class people instead of, and this literally happened, 99-year tax breaks to corporate developers.
Yeah, every time we have a P word, we love to put that over profit. People over profit, planet over profit, Poughkeepsie over profit. Anyone running in Peekskill, Poughkeepsie, I'm out of P word cities in New York. There's got to be more.
Right. Keep it in mind, though. Yeah. So here in New York City, most of us don't know a lot about the Hudson Valley, except for that they're kind of like extended commuter cities, right? They're not like inner ring suburbs, but a lot of people who live in New York City increasingly have moved there, especially during the pandemic with remote work. And that led to some divides, right? People who've been living there for a long time are like, yo, you all are driving up the housing prices and making it very different here. And some people were like, they arrived 15 years ago and they're mad about it too. Like there's all this, we hear about the conflicts only insofar as they relate to New York City. So tell us a little bit more about your communities and not just in a New York City centric way. And I apologize for being NYC centric.
You're the one that did it, yeah.
Right, but like that's all we know, right? So I want to know more.
Tell us about your commuter towns.
The city of Poughkeepsie, the city of Poughkeepsie is the last stop on the Metro North line, riding up, and so I've taken the train back and forth many times to visit New York City, and I love New York City. I support congestion pricing. Please do not cancel me. I really do think that the city of Poughkeepsie is a very unique city with a lot to offer. And so we do have a lot of people who, take the train down and work in New York City. But we are on our own, like a really vibrant, thriving city as well. I mean, we have the walkway over the Hudson. I was just there for a massive pro-Palestine, anti-fascism protest. And so we have like a whole organizing community here. We have, I would say, the best DSA chapter in the country here, Mid-Hudson Valley DSA. And I'm so honored to be endorsed by them. We are going through a lot of struggles, right? I would say that, the real estate market is really, really tough here. This has been labeled as one of the hottest real estate markets in the country, the Mid-Hudson Valley. I don't blame the people who moved here, right? Because a lot of times the people who moved here were getting pushed out of New York City because they got priced out of there, right? And so I don't blame them. I blame the landlords and the developers who are fueling this housing crisis and treating housing as a commodity instead of what, we believe it is, a human right. And so, if someone moves here because they were pushed out of somewhere else, I don't point a finger at them. And what I would hope though is that they then get involved in organizing with like Mid Hudson Valley DSA to then pass laws like we've passed good cause eviction in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, and good cause eviction helps tenants be able to afford to stay in their homes. And so we saw a lot of people who were recently moved here, but then got involved in the fight for good cause eviction because they saw the common struggle of people who were being priced out of where they live, and they didn't want that to keep happening. And so they got involved in that fight along with people who have lived here almost their entire lives, like I have, right? And that is so important, that solidarity, because there's going to be all kinds of narratives and stuff that try to divide people up and say like, oh, you've only been here for a year, so you don't know what you're talking about. You have to listen to people like us. And sometimes the people who have lived here their whole lives, right, are people who are on the sides of the landlords and the developers. And so just saying I've lived here my whole life doesn't tell me everything I need to know. It's like, who are you fighting for? Who are you allied with? Who are you taking money from? Which is really crucial, right? If you're an elected official. So, I've lived here my whole life, but that is, I don't try to treat that as like a magic superpower, I want to know like, who are you fighting for? Who are you fighting with? And, if you're organizing with Mid Hudson Valley DSA, then I don't care if you moved here a year ago.
This was your answer is like shades of that episode we did about New York City identity politics around like, yeah. Daniel Atonna, not just candidate for Common Council, also huge Left on Red fan. So yes. we're extra happy to have him on today. But it strikes me that the New York City transplant versus native is not a New York City exclusive phenomenon. People are probably using it everywhere and talking about the idea and phenomenon of gentrification and identity and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting to hear that in your answer around Poughkeepsie.
It's a way to try to say, these people get to speak and these people do not.
Right. As
if that, if you've been here your whole life, then, you can't speak for any of the interests in the community because, your ideas are from the outside. I've been seeing this discourse around the DSA right now on Twitter, which I should stay off Twitter. But like people are saying, well, the DSA ruined America and New York City. And I was like, oh, show me all the people in power running the city. I see Eric Adams. And they're like, well, the DSA, they're not from here. Anyway, so Giselle, tell us about yourself. Tell us about, tell us a little bit about Newburgh. I don't know very much about Newburgh except for it's on the other side of the river.
Correct. Yeah. So a lot of similarities to Poughkeepsie. City of Newburgh, we don't have access to the train, so people actually have to cross the bridge or cross on a ferry. And while people were being pushed out of cities where the Metro North ran through, people started coming across the bridge. And so Newburgh is one of the cities that, in my opinion, we've actually have been fighting or holding on as hard as we can, not to push out residents and continue to keep families who were here for generations that want to stay in Newburgh to stay here. With that being said, we also have that same narrative where if you are born and raised in the city of Newburgh, you have almost like people automatically trust you a lot more than if you say, I'm new here or I've lived here for X amount of years. You could have lived there for like 40 years, but they're like, are you born and raised here? It's a lot about identity politics. City of Newburgh is tough. It's tough love, but it's love. People here are very passionate about the community, and we have such a diverse community. My parents immigrated in the late 90s to City of Newburgh. They're from Mexico. And so they were part of the first wave of immigrants who came to Newburgh. And since then, the Latino population has grown. However, even though we're about 60% of the population, because we're mixed status, a lot of people in our community can't vote. So you have a lot of new homeowners in the historical side of our city, because city of Newburgh is a very historical city along the Hudson River. We have Washington headquarters. We were mentioned we have a Newburgh conspiracy where George Washington basically declared that he wasn't going to be king, and they have this whole thing with the revolution here in city of Newburgh. We were the first city or second city with electricity. So, I'm a big history person, and I've always I did research on how was it that we were named America's great, one of like the top cities. And a couple years ago, while I was growing up in Newburgh, we were actually named like the murder capital of New York. And so it was like, um, we go through like history of white flight after we had Black Southerners move up to Newburgh and areas in the Hudson Valley. And with white flight in 50s, 60s, a lot of our factories, the work left and left a lot of people impoverished. And obviously, the war on drugs, when that epidemic happened, a lot of our community members were left very vulnerable. And so we've done a lot of work to kind of like overturn that narrative and those negative stereotypes. But because we're a predominantly Black and Brown community, we run into a lot of issues with surrounding municipalities and the county. But what I would say about City of Newburgh is that similar to how Dan was talking, although we are very protective of our community, we are also very welcoming. I've met so many wonderful people that move from the city, and because they know what it's like to be pushed out of their homes and then have to relocate, a lot of people have joined the fight in saying, hey, this happened to me. I don't want it to happen to my new neighbors. They've been so welcoming, and we're going to join you in that fight. And it's just so beautiful. I ran into so many people today. Actually, we talked about what it meant to be like a Newburgh resident and how passionate people were. And also, just to point out a little bit, people in Newburgh are socialists without even knowing they're socialists. Anytime that I knock on their door and we go through our platform and they're like, yes, I agree. And I'm like, would you ever consider joining DSA? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I think it's just the word socialism, and it's really just connecting people and letting them know, well, this is what we stand for, and you agree, so join the fight.
Bouncing off something Giselle said, Newburgh and Poughkeepsie both went through similar economic things where, like, the cities both used to be much bigger in terms of population and have a lot more, industry and high-paying jobs. But it's really attributable to a couple different factors, right? So, like the decline, like the rise of highways, right? The Federal Highway Act and all that stuff, like taking people out of cities into, suburbs. All right, so now we're talking about suburbanization, right? We're talking about white flight, deindustrialization, urban renewal. All of these things contributed to, the decline of these cities, and now they're in a tough place where they're struggling economically. And now there's all kinds of people who are trying to like sell us, these like, get rich quick schemes that are supposedly going to save, if we just give this developer a bunch of money or give this business a bunch of money, they'll save our city. And I really don't see that. I think we need to build the economy from the ground up, right? Investing in working class people in their schools and their jobs, right? And stuff like that. Investing in them as human beings instead of like just throwing a bunch of money at developers and corporations. But there are like really particular, moments in capitalism, right? And things that led to our cities being the way that they are. But I think that, through the working class coming together, like we can revive them again.
The highways is a great call out because New York State, this is actually a very strong pattern throughout the state, has a lot of really grand historical cities, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and then going down the Hudson River, Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, right? And a lot of these places were a lot larger because there was so much of the economy moving through the Hudson River and then the Erie Canal into the Great Lakes. And with the decline of not just manufacturing, but then moving, freight, and transit, off of rail or off of boats. A lot of it moved to trucks, and now a lot of those like economic routes just disappeared.
One of our biggest tourist attractions in the city of Poughkeepsie is the walkway over the Hudson, and I love the walkway over the Hudson. Like I said, I was just there for a protest, and it's like this long bridge that goes over the Hudson River that's like a walking pathway. But what it used to be was a railroad line, and it would carry freight and passengers across the river, and like that, that was like a site of industry and commerce and traveling back and forth. But over time, there was passed between different corporations that didn't maintain the line. Eventually, there was a fire, and then it was no longer usable. And then decades later, a nonprofit, I believe, invested in it and was able to turn it into the walkway. But it kind of showed, like, over time, there was just this like movement away from investing in public transit and towards the highways and the cars and all that stuff, and it really hurt a city like Poughkeepsie that then all of a sudden had less business coming through and less people coming through.
That's another fun fact. Poughkeepsie is where the Amtrak is no longer electrified going north. So once the Amtrak leaves Poughkeepsie, it is now running on diesel and
I would not
polluting
call
the
that
media
fun.
community.
That fact is not fun.
But
Sorry, I just wanted to ask really quickly, because I also, like a New Yorker, at one point looked into these towns, right? Because I have kids, and like one of the things I learned about was a lot of these towns were once very bustling places with lots of factories. And I don't know if it was like IBM or like Kodak, but there was lots of stuff being made. And that's no longer the case. And even now today, you can find out about factories and like production being shut down in Hudson Valley, even like right now. But it is a place where stuff historically and continues to get made. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, we focus on like places like Detroit, right, where a place where that had been so thriving with manufacturing, and but like a lot of the U.S. is like this, right? And I was wondering, like, to what extent do you see MAGA and sort of these kinds of Trump-like ideologies taking hold, where people are just like, if only we brought manufacturing back, we could come back to our old glory.
I don't know, Dan, I think I can answer a little bit of this. So actually, we've been seeing a lot of that in Orange County. We're predominantly red. I call it MAGA territory. City of Newburgh is probably one of two cities that is blue, and the rest is red. So throughout our county, we see people and our county Republicans advocating for manufacturing, for more factories. And personally, for me, I understand that a lot of people just want something that brings in jobs, that brings in opportunities to put food on their table. However, having family, having parents who worked and alternated shifts at these factories and were exploited for their labor, who were getting paid below minimum wage, who, again, like, the working conditions were not safe, were not ideal, or, in my opinion, humane. You know, I'm not against jobs, but I am against the treatment that workers were receiving. And for the most part, a lot of the manufacturing jobs that are advocated for don't even go for communities where they're needed. For example, people who live in like the city of Newburgh, we don't even have transportation or access to any of these proposed job opportunities. And so it's the same thing. It's like you're bringing jobs, you're telling people that you're bringing jobs to us, but that's not true. You're actually gatekeeping these opportunities. And it's the same cycle. A lot of the times opportunities go to other parts of the county, but predominantly sometimes even people out of state. So that's an issue that we run into a lot, that the people who would rely or could be of use don't have access to. But in my opinion, I mean, we've fought a lot for workers' rights, and we're going to continue fighting for it. I mean, there's a lot of new Amazon warehouses that I know that Dan has also been a part of, the like trying to get people to unionize. There's a lot new Teslas factories opening up too. And people are excited about like signing up to work and get paid, and then they go through all these horrible working conditions. It's just, people feel like they have to deal with the bad in order to get. They're like, oh, it's okay. Like, I have to work hard and I have to earn it, instead of like, no, this is your right as a worker. You deserve this and more. So, yeah, but I'll let Dan jump in.
Similarly, right? So in Poughkeepsie, in the 19th and 20th century, it was like a shipping and manufacturing hub, right? And Poughkeepsie produced boots, shoes, cigars, dairy equipment, beer, paper, clothing, barrels, glass, dyes, and like a bunch more things. So, like a lot of things were being made in Poughkeepsie. But when you look in the 21st century, right, our economy is now largely dependent on service sector jobs, healthcare, public sector jobs, educational institutions, tourism, the arts, and like these are not necessarily bad things, right? But I think the key is, what are we doing to make sure that these sectors are and warehousing, right, the warehouses that Giselle mentioned. How are we making sure that these sectors are being unionized, right, and that the workers are making decent wages? So, our economy has shifted, right? These are like global things that are going on that one city cannot undo. But I think whatever we can do to make sure that, again, that we have union jobs in these places is really, really crucial. And so that's why I've been proud to be out on the picket line over the years with like over a dozen unions fighting for unions and contracts, and making sure that workers are getting what they deserve, because workers make the world run, so they should run the world.
That's a good, snappy line.
Yes.
And I like the MAGA question about the jobs. Thank you, Susan, because, and I'm glad, Giselle, you were bringing it out. When we've been talking about it so far, neither of you live in Sarahana Shrestha, Assemblymember Sarahana Shrestha's district, which is a little bit further north. Which is Susan's favorite sweater, by the way.
It's so warm. Why would I wear a different sweater?
Can you show it again? Like stand up and back up a little bit so we can see the whole, Green
Classic.
New Deal before it deals with you. It's really good. I have one too. I should pull it out. But Sarahana's district is a little bit further north of you guys and includes kind of centered around Kingston, includes other parts. And I think Kingston and Beacon, and so Beacon is the town right over the river from Newburgh. Kingston and Beacon are kind of held up as these places in upstate New York where a lot of New York City residents moved and kind of gentrified significantly. And what I think is really cool about what you two are doing is Newburgh and Poughkeepsie are both majority minority, both substantially lower income cities. And it's really powerful that, Giselle, you're already an elected council member, right? Over there, and Dan, that you're running for a race in Poughkeepsie. And I'm curious, we've kind of touched on it already in terms of how red the surrounding county is, in terms of, Giselle, you said something I really I think about all the time. People are already socialists, but they don't think that, right? And so I'm curious about your experiences and your thoughts on being a DSA elected and also running as DSA candidates in these cities that are traditionally not where DSA candidates have won elections in the past 5 years.
So yeah, like you said, right, the city of Poughkeepsie is majority minority, and struggles with a high poverty rate, and it's majority renter as well, which is really important. But yeah, we have a lot of work to do to organize in the city of Poughkeepsie and get people to understand like what we mean when we say democratic socialism, right? And I do see part of my campaign is like trying to mainstream that idea. So like on my website and on my literature, it says I'm a democratic socialist, and I don't presume that people know what that means, right? Most people are not paying attention to DSA, unfortunately, not yet. But on the lit and on my website, it explains like I'm a democratic socialist, and that means I will always fight for the working class instead of for corporations. And so I think the work that we're doing here in these cities, in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, is really important for exposing this idea of DSA and democratic socialism to a wider range of people. And people who need it, right? Like we're seeing in both of our cities, right? A housing crisis, right? where people are being pushed out and the rents are just way too high. And that's why Giselle, when she was on the city council, like passed good cause eviction. I helped pass good cause eviction, like working from the outside, in Poughkeepsie. And so like it's very important that we like continue passing tenant protections. Also really important, both of our cities are struggling with a lead pipe crisis. And Giselle's done a lot of great work on the city council, making sure that lead pipes get been replaced. And then me working on the outside in Poughkeepsie, I got a commitment for the first time from the city that they would replace lead pipes. We ran a huge campaign around that, around knocking doors and showing up to council meetings and giving public comments, and having a press conference, being very vocal about it to the point where the city decided that they would finally commit to replacing the pipes. Now. The city says they're going to get it done in 30 years. I think that is way too long to wait. We cannot have another 30 years worth of young people being poisoned by lead pipes. Actually, I have lead pipes in my home, and I cannot afford to replace them. That's another problem. We can't expect, working class families to replace their lead pipes. That is very expensive. And so we need to find a way where the city, through grants from the federal government, state government, county government, need to find a way where the city can help people pay for this lead pipe replacement and get it done way faster than 30 years. 30 years is way too long. And so, these are key parts. Giselle also touched on public transportation and that being an issue in our cities, right? So again, Newburgh is basically a blue city in like a sea of red, and Poughkeepsie is similar, right? Like a blue city in a sea of red in Dutchess County, although things are changing in Dutchess County, and that's very exciting. But, I would say that public transportation has been underinvested in by both of our counties, controlled by Republican executives and Republican county legislatures. And so one of the things I'm running on is a fare free bus line in the city of Poughkeepsie, because I think that's really important for people to be able to get around and get to work and get to doctor's appointments, and also just like enjoy all the beautiful things in our city. Like you should have a fare free bus line to be able to get around and see all of that. And so, I think we're both running on these platforms that kind of touch on different issues that are being experienced in our cities. And then by, running on these things and calling ourselves democratic socialists, it's like connecting this popular idea with like this like term that we're trying to get people to identify as. And I think that can only be a good thing.
I don't consider us upstate, but to a lot of folks in New York City, we're considered upstate. So for our area in the Mid Hudson Valley area, socialism is just a scary word. People don't know what it means, and until you lead with issues that really affect your community, that's when people start realizing, oh, this isn't actually such a scary word. I mean, one of my favorite stories to share is that we do brake light clinics in city of Newburgh. And the Mid Hudson Valley chapter, we were doing one on Broadway in Newburgh. And something as simple as having translated literature for Spanish-speaking residents. I had my parents read it, and they were reading the pamphlet like, oh, I think I'm a socialist. And it was just so funny because literally a couple months ago, my parents were like, Giselle, be careful. That word socialist, we don't know. You might, my parents come from a different political climate. And so they were very afraid of that word. And if you ask them why, they would just be like, oh, well, that's what, countries, what news say that it's bad. And so when they read the pamphlet and they were like, I think I'm a socialist. And I was like, great, this is amazing. I'm recruiting my parents. And that's the story that so many city of Newburgh residents and majority of the Hudson Valley might experience, is that they just do not know what that word means. And when you come to their door, where you meet them where they're at, and you explain, these are the issues that we're fighting for, and this is what it means. It means that, a lot, in my personal opinion, our society is just very individualistic. And so we kind of have to rope them back into like this collective society where like, it's like, if we fight together, we're going to be stronger together. Going into a little bit of what Dan was mentioning, a lot of people in the city of Newburgh are kind of like unaware of what issues are happening because they're fighting. I mean, they're literally working 12-hour shifts to put food on the table. They have a million and one things happening, trying to keep a roof over their head. A lot of the city, again, like our income levels are not how Westchester, how the city might be. Like our wages are a lot lower here. I believe the statistic was 1 in 4 people live below the federal poverty line. Unfortunately, sometimes politics is a privilege to people. While they want to be involved, they don't have the ability, they don't have the capacity to be involved. And so they don't know. I feel like it's our responsibility, to go to people where they are, meet them where they're at, explain that, their voices are powerful, they have power behind them, and organize and mobilize our communities to come out and advocate for issues that affect them and affect us. Because so many of us are, when you're in this type of work for so long, you can get burnt out. And we can avoid that by just having the majority do the work.
10 seconds, hot take. Why do people care so much about the upstate label? Because to me, growing up, it was, whenever we'd travel north, we're like, oh, we're going upstate. And it's not because I think of upstate as a region. I think of upstate as just like a relative position. That you're upstate once you leave New York City in New York, or you're in New York City, or you're on Long Island. Those are the 3 relative positions of New York State. But a lot of people think of upstate as a specific region, and it has boundaries.
So I will say I strongly disagree with Giselle. I do believe that Newburgh and Poughkeepsie and Beacon are all upstate, as well as Kingston. There are more like nuanced terms, right? Like there's like the Southern Tier, there's Western New York, like those, you can break it down further. But I would call the Mid-Hudson Valley upstate. I just think that they have a different feel from like Westchester and New York City. Like, again, I love Westchester, I love New York City, I love congestion pricing, do not cancel me. But I still think that the Mid-Hudson Valley has like a special feel to it where it's like kind of in the middle, and you have access to like urban areas, right? Like Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, but then you have like suburban areas, you have really rural areas, you have these great hiking trails and access to nature immediately nearby. And so like I think that we are upstate, we have a certain feel, so I disagree with Giselle. In fact, I'm logging off this podcast right now. I'm so upset.
I want to counter that just really quick, just to say that when I think of upstate, I think of like all suburban area, which is probably why I've never considered Poughkeepsie and Newburgh like that, because we have that special mix. I do agree with Dan there. It's that mix of urban, suburban areas. I've just always felt like upstate was very kind of like farmland as well, and very different demographics and political scene. So I think that's probably why, because we're in the middle. We're in the middle.
We still have farmland in Dutchess and Orange.
Is Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo upstate?
Yes, and some of those cities you listed are capital region. If you want to break it down further.
Oh yeah. I do know all the regions, and my favorite one that I've never actually been in, but I think sounds the coolest, is North Country.
Yes.
Which is, by the way, extremely sparsely populated. Like, you want to talk about farmland. I don't even know if they have farmland up there. It's tundra. They do grow apples. We're going to offend someone. But, I feel like there's a lot of cities.
We're also going to bore people who don't care about New York State. So let's not act like every place has its character. Every place has, regional specifications. And that the people there make it special and lovely and nice. And every time I go visit a place, I'm like, oh, how cute. And then when I come back to New York, I'm like, I'm home. So yes, I agree that the Mid-Hudson Valley is something special. It's not Westchester. It's not, I don't know. It's not the capital region. And it's got diversity. I think that's the first thing that we don't really think about, is that it's not like just a bunch of white people with really nice riverfront homes, right?
Twitter celebrity Aaron Fernando, a good friend of mine, he always visits me up in Poughkeepsie, and he calls us a village, which is very insulting. He's like, "Oh, I'm visiting your little village. There's more people in my apartment building than live in your entire city."
Isn't Poughkeepsie complicated? Like, there's like a city and a village. Isn't Poughkeepsie?
Okay, so one of the most annoying things about the Mid-Hudson Valley is that there are like cities and then like towns that have the same name, and I do think that should be illegal. I don't think that should be allowed. So there's like the city of Poughkeepsie, and then it's surrounded entirely by the town of Poughkeepsie. And again, the town of Poughkeepsie, also lovely, but they just shouldn't have the same name. It's too confusing.
In Aaron's defense, it was so shocking to me, maybe when I was like 16 years old, as someone who grew up in New York City, who learned about everywhere else in the United States. And I was like, because I thought everyone lived in a place like New York. I was like, oh, this is my normal, right? And so as a child, you don't have any, like, maybe consciously at the front of my head, I knew the rest of the country looked different. But in the back of my head, I was like, oh, this is what life is like for everyone. This is my normal. It's normal for everyone. And so it is a little jarring to go to another place and be like, oh, there's like no one here. It happened to me. I was in Albany just a couple of weeks ago. I've been in Albany a few times for work. And it was so shocking to be like in the streets or walking around and there's like 5 people. And in the moment you get out of the train in New York and you're in Midtown, there's more people than I saw on my entire 2-day trip, right? So it's a really jarring, and it goes back exactly to what you guys were saying. It doesn't even necessarily mean like, oh, New York City has so many people, but it's one of the only remaining dense places in the country. And that's because when everywhere else was getting eviscerated by highways and was having all this white flight, New York City still experienced a lot of that. The city was fortunate to have a dense transit system and all of these things that allowed it to retain some level of density and urban character in a way that a lot of other places have suffered.
I already started this podcast by saying we weren't going to be New York City centric, and in no way have we actually done that. So, Daniel, Giselle, I was wondering what you thought are the advantages and disadvantages of socialist organizing, including electoral work, in smaller cities, right? Because we hear about it like in medium cities, like we hear about places like Minneapolis, or like, big cities that aren't New York, like Chicago. But I was wondering, what are the disadvantages, advantages? Like, what are the opportunities when you're not at a place like New York is just so entrenched, like the machine is just like its own. And by machine, I don't mean like a literal machine, but like all the power players who've been working their whole lives to create little like fiefdoms, right? It's like studying European history almost, right? But I don't know. It's like less castles or something. All right. So would love to hear both of your takes on this.
Dan recruited, I feel like Dan was responsible for so many new members. He recruited my sister. I tried so hard to get my sister to join. And then my sister one day was like, hey, I'm a DSA member now. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, Dan helped me sign up. I was like, girl, I've literally asked you so many times.
I have recruited over 30 people to DSA and led 2 successful membership drives for our chapter. So yes, we're one of the best DSA chapters in the country, nearly 600 dues-paying members all across Dutchess, Orange, Ulster, and Sullivan counties. And we do work in like every single area, right? Like we're doing housing organizing, trying to pass good cause eviction in all our upstate municipalities. Labor organizing, right, on the picket line with labor unions everywhere, and trying to organize Amazon warehouses. Palestine Liberation Working Group, working on a campaign with JVP to try to divest the state pension fund from Israel. Our eco-socialism working group, working with our assembly member, Sarah Hanna-Sethstra, who we elected, right, on trying to do a public takeover of our corrupt, failing utility, Central Hudson. And then others the electoral working group, right? Yeah, there's people running for elections, Giselle and I, and trying to get us Giselle back in office and me in office for the first time. And so we're doing work in all these different areas. I would say that what's really exciting is that we are kind of like doing it all, right? Like we are organizing in red areas, purple areas, blue areas, right? We're organizing in urban areas, suburban, rural. Our chapter has it all, and we kind of see everything and are trying to like figure out what's the best ways to organize in all these different places. And it makes it really exciting. And yes, we were like the fastest growing DSA chapter in the country last year. And I think that really speaks to that this is like a really like fertile ground for organizing right now, and people see that we're doing all this exciting work. Like our chapter helped lead the way on passing the Build Public Renewables Act, this huge climate law in New York State. We worked very closely with New York City DSA. It wasn't just us, but like we were a big part of it, right? Like our chapter has passed good cause eviction tenant protections in multiple municipalities, including Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, but in other places as well. Protecting tens of thousands of tenants now. Our chapter has been, was out on the picket line with so many different unions, right? Like the Teamsters and the UAW and the Writers Guild. We're everywhere and we're doing it all. And like, I think that's why we're growing so fast. But there's just so many like things happening in the Mid-Hudson Valley, and it's so exciting to be part of an organization that's like, playing a huge role in all of it.
And I want to just also go on the record and state that Dan was the person who recruited me when I was running. Before I became a DSA member, Dan actually reached out to me and had asked me if I was interested in, joining and, being part of DSA, but also going for the endorsement. And just really quick, I want to share a quick story of I'm pretty involved in our Democratic committee locally and at the county level. That's how I began my journey in politics. And a lot of my friends, advisors were like, Giselle, do not label yourself as a socialist. Like, that is like political suicide. Be careful. They're not going to take you serious. And I think the best thing I ever did was to ignore that and be like, hey guys, I'm a socialist. And like, it was just like probably the best thing that I ever did, because at the end of the day, the people who carried me, the people who helped me get elected was DSA. And I'm forever grateful for our chapter. And since then, like Dan mentioned, our chapter has grown so much. And not only that, but people who had first joined my campaign and helped me get elected. A lot of people on our team were new, and we saw so many young people. Like my first for the first campaign, I think majority of our volunteers were under 30, predominantly under 25, and my youngest volunteer was 15. He was our youngest chapter member, Michael Martinez, and he came out canvassing with me. He joined our DSA meetings. I just thought it was so amazing to see the youth, but also to see so many people come out and, do this type of work. And like Dan mentioned, since then, we've gained so much experience. People who had worked on, either my campaign, on Sarah Hanna's campaign in Kingston, now that are working on Dan's campaign. We still have new people who have never worked on any type of electoral or other issue campaigns. And then they gain all this experience. And it's just amazing to see people's growth. I think you had also asked some of the challenges that we face, as socialists here in Newburgh, Poughkeepsie. For myself, because in New York City, I feel like the left or more progressive views are popular and they work, in messaging. Here, it's a little different, especially when sometimes they don't align with the establishment in the Democratic Party. And because I am part of both, I'm able to kind of be like a bridge and to push both DSA, not just DSA, but like I'm also part of like the Working Families Party, just in general, a more leftist and more progressive agenda within our own party. It's like we kind of have to be a part of those spaces, even though sometimes I don't want to be, and like we fight, but I think the challenge is that the old school guard doesn't want to let like new progressives into the party. And so you kind of have to like make your way in and gain that, to them, credibility, right? But there's other candidates who didn't have to do that, and it worked out perfect. And it really just depends on the demographics. And personally, for me, it depends if your community's ready for that type of change. Unfortunately, the numbers might be there, but if the voter turnout isn't, or not enough people feel inspired, it could be very tough to get them to come out.
One thing I'm wondering is, given the relative success of Mid-Hudson Valley, and again, it has to be stated, an extraordinary successful chapter, right? It's not just the leading chapter for greatest percentage growth, but it's like the leading by this much, right? I don't know if I'm doing this right. You're very much on top by a mile. It's stunning. And by the way, you forgot to mention, and maybe you guys didn't play the hugest role in this, but you're also part of the Stop Dance Scammer Plant Coalition, which I guess was a few years ago. So maybe there's too many years of things that you've accomplished to remember everything. But I remember that because when we were doing the NRG stuff, we were working with Hudson Valley folks on Dance Scammer as well. It was this fossil fuel fracked gas peaker plant they were trying to build in Newburgh. We were able to stop all of these plants from being built that year, which is really successful. What advice would you give? You talk a little bit about electoral. I'm a listener and I'm in a relatively small or medium-sized chapter. And I don't know the first thing to do in order to get to this level of success. And maybe I feel down because I don't live in a particularly blue or progressive city, or maybe I feel down because my chapter is already really small and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of stuff for me to build off of. What advice do you have for me and a person in that situation in terms of how to build a genuinely socialist chapter or org or movement in a place where you're really climbing uphill?
Start small, right? Like, you know, uh, we often in our chapter use the labor notes bullseye, right? Like map out your membership, figure out like who's involved and who's not involved and who could be more involved, and try to get people like closer to being in the core. Like build up your team, right, in the chapter, like your core group of organizers. And then like if you're trying to do electoral work, right, like do district research, right? Figure out like what are districts where we might be more favorable to win. Sometimes you can get that data by looking at you can look at data from progressive races that may or may not have been DSA races, right, that had gone on in recent years, and see like, okay, did they do really well in this one part of the city? Maybe that's a place where we could run a socialist candidate. And so like, look for signs like, did they have a high WFP vote share, or, something like that. Look for signs of like, do they have a lot of tenants? Is this a place where a DSA candidate could maybe do well? So the district research first, and then start looking at like who are organizers in your chapter who live in that district or who are involved in the community and who might be willing to run for office. One of the reasons why I'm the chapter's endorsed candidate in the city of Poughkeepsie Common Council Ward 8 is because like I am like chapter cadre, right? Like I served as the electoral working group co-chair, right? Like I served as Giselle's campaign manager, which was like in 2021 when Giselle ran, that was our first ever electoral wins. I served on the steering committee for 2 terms. I currently serve as the Dutchess County co-chair, right? Like I've been involved in the chapter since I joined in early 2020. And it's about like investing in someone who's like very involved in DSA and growing DSA. And that's part of why like I was chosen to like run for this race. Because like I live and grew up here in the city of Poughkeepsie in Ward 8. And so like I have close connections to the community. And so, it's like the district first, then find the candidate, and then like get it done. But yeah, I would say start small, right? With like a city council race or something first before, I know that city council races are actually very big in New York City. So people always laugh from New York City DSA when I tell them my win number, right? Which is 175 votes. And people can never believe it. They're like, what? 175 votes to win a city council seat? But yeah, that's... it's harder than it sounds, but it is, it starts small if you're in a small city or something, or maybe some other small office that you could run a chapter member for. If it's other kinds of organizing, it kind of fits, it's similar, right? It's like, figure out who is active in your chapter, who is not active, but how to figure out ways to get them active, and like, power map, like figure out, are we trying to pass a housing law? Or are we trying to like, win a divestment campaign or something? Like do a power map of like who controls what, and what are the different ways to pressure them, and then build a campaign timeline, a leadership pipeline. These are all buzzwords, but they're buzzwords for good reason, because actually they have like meaning. So campaign timeline, leadership pipeline, like develop those things so that you can like actually make a campaign. I'm very, as people say, I am very campaign pilled. Like I believe in like turning things into campaigns with like clear objectives and winnable goals, because I do think that builds victories. I think that's one of our strengths in Mid-Hudson Valley DSA, is that we've had a lot of like small campaigns that have led to victories. Like, it took years to, it could take years to pass like a housing law on the state level, right? Like right now we're working on the Social Housing Development Authority. That campaign is probably going to take years. We're very dedicated to it. It's one of our priority campaigns. But in the meantime, we've been passing local good cause eviction campaigns in like different municipalities, and so that like created little wins on the way towards like bigger wins on the state level. Is like we're passing tenant protections in smaller ways before we can like pass something big on the state level. And so find ways to like build in little wins into your campaign to like keep the momentum up and keep the energy up.
I'll admit that I haven't been as involved with in terms of like organizing to build I guess like to recruit more members. But what I have done and what I feel does work is community building. Um, if you aren't as known or might be new in an area, um, get involved and meet with the people in the community who do hold weight, who are credible messengers, and build relationships with them. One of the issues that we've ran into that was an issue before but isn't an issue now is that when I was running, although I was born and raised in the city of Newburgh and I had all of these, the background, the experience and different things, um, I needed credible messengers behind me to kind of, open a door for me in certain parts of the community that I hadn't reached before and didn't have access to. And I think this could be used both in electoral work and it could be used for smaller campaigns. Something that we've done a lot in Newburgh, Mid Hudson Valley in general, is door knocking and canvassing for these issues and just taking some time to get to know people. I personally, listen, I don't like door knocking in this weather, but we got to do it. And what makes it worth it is the conversations that we have with people, is going to the community events, asking people what it is that they want to see, that they care about. For example, right now we're supporting and fighting for the Hudson Valley Power Authority bill. And so anytime that we reach people at the doors regarding this, they're like, oh my God, yeah, I want to know more. How can I get involved? We open up a door for people to like join our group. And it's just having conversations, just seeing like, hey, you and I both have this common goal. What else can we do? And then we kind of like slowly rope them into, hey, there's this other issue. Do you care about this too? Do you want to be a part of that too? And slowly but surely, you build relationships and then you also build the numbers in, growing the movement.
Let's say I'm a Left on Red listener. I don't live in the Hudson Valley, so I can't do a canvassing volunteer shift for you, but what can I do to help your races?
So personally for me, I would definitely, I always appreciate any type of donations in small races like mine, and I know Dan's. We fight tooth and nail for every single vote. And it's really hard because we spend a lot of, we take pledges not to take money from big corporations, from real estate, from developers, from police unions. While I am a big believer in like grassroots efforts, we also we have to ask people, and sometimes our universe is small. Sometimes like we burn through our list and we're like, okay, now who do we ask for money? So any type of donation, even if it's $5, it goes such a long way for our materials, for mailers, because there's a lot of apartments in city of Newburgh. And so while we go out and canvass, sometimes we don't have access. There's no doorbell. It's like you're knocking really hard trying to see if someone on the third floor can hear you. So really, the funding, especially because, and I'll let Dan talk about his opponent, but my potential opponent is in real estate. And I've always, I put a target on my back because of a lot of the tenant laws that we've passed. And a lot of people, had been keeping an eye on my race. So we will need support to go up against possible threats.
Yeah, so for me, check out my website, Daniel for PK.com, Daniel FORPK.com. And yeah, I mean, we are very lucky. DSA members, chapter members were very generous. Like we have raised nearly $10,000, which is like way more than we need for the primary. And so yeah, we're very blessed. I think the biggest thing we need is canvassing. And so you know, if you live in New York City and you ever want to take a ride on the Metro North up up to the city of Poughkeepsie, you can do that. Come canvass. Um, but more realistically, just keep up to date with what the campaign's going on. If you want to share it on social media, that's helpful too. I'm Daniel Atonna I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, if people still use that. So, check out the campaign, give us a like or share so get more visible. And yeah, just we're just going to be door knocking. That's the biggest thing now. Like, we have the money, we have the endorsements. Like, so blessed to have Mid Hudson Valley DSA, New York Working Families Party, for the many. And so really, it's just about knocking the doors and getting it done. I'll say one really interesting thing about the Mid Hudson Valley's politics, comparing it and contrasting with New York City, is like our Democratic committees, I would say, are generally very weak. And like, they are not machines the way that the New York City parties have been traditionally. Like, we don't have machines here because there just wasn't like a lot of like like jobs and money to disperse. And so a lot of our Democratic committees are just like, well-meaning liberals and older people who are scared of Trump and wanted to get involved. And they do, they knock on doors and sometimes, and they do good work sometimes. But when it comes time, when a DSA member is like running against an establishment candidate, like, we kind of ran right over them with Sarah Hanna's assembly race, right? Like, I will say that now, this is another interesting contrast, is that now Sarah Hanna has a very good relationship, I think, with the Ulster County and Dutchess County Democratic committees, and a lot of the Democratic committee members love her. A lot of the Orange County Democratic committee members love Giselle. She's endorsed by the Orange County Democratic Committee. Again, it's like very different because, like, I know in the city, like, the Democratic committees, like, like the county parties, like, do not embrace the DSA candidates, right? Even after they win and have served multiple terms. So, like, yeah, it's a very interesting difference. I would say one similarity, though, is that, just like New York City, right? A lot of people who know that they can't get elected as Republicans then run as Democrats, and that happens in our upstate cities as well, right? So. In Poughkeepsie, my opponent. So my district has such an interesting history, which was like in 2021, Sakima McClinton was appointed to the council. She is a former Republican who then switched to a Democrat to try to get elected. She was appointed to the council, and then Megan Dykler, who was a Mid Hudson Valley DSA endorsed candidate, defeated her. Even though she was incumbent, Megan defeated her in the election in 2021. Then Megan got reelected in a landslide in 2023. I was running her campaign back then, and I lived in her district. And Megan got reelected in a landslide in 2023, but then sadly, and we got a lot of things done. Me and Megan working together, like we helped pass good cause eviction, tenant protections, helped pass a cap on the vacation rentals, the whole home Airbnbs that are popping up all over, Newburgh and Poughkeepsie. I actually live right next door to a single family home that's just a full-time 24/7, 365 day a year hotel. And it's ridiculous. While we have a housing crisis, that there's this house that's just entirely taken off the housing market and is only being used as a hotel for tourists. And so we got a cap on those vacation rentals. We got the city to commit to replacing lead pipes. We got all these things done, working together with Megan as a DSA elected. But then sadly, her family, they found their dream home outside of Poughkeepsie, and so they moved. And so then she had to resign from the council. And so then the council, to keep the, I was hoping they would do interviews and give me a fair shot to hopefully be appointed. But instead, they decided to appoint Sakima McClinton again, who they had appointed in 2021. Again, this is a former Republican who has run for office 9 times, and has never won. She has never won 9 times as a Democrat and Republican and has never been elected. But they appointed her to keep me off the council because they know that, I push really hard for tenants and for homeowners and for lead pipe replacement and against corporations. I will say one of the things that's going on in the city of Poughkeepsie is that the City of Poughkeepsie Industrial Development Agency, the IDA, which is appointed by our Common Council, has given out $150 million in tax breaks to corporations and developers. And we're talking about a 99-year tax break for a luxury apartment complex, and then another 99-year tax break for a fancy restaurant on the waterfront. And again, these things like, so 99-year tax breaks, $150 million in tax breaks to corporations and developers. How big is the city of Poughkeepsie budget? About $100 million. So it's just completely starving the city of much needed revenue. And when I'm knocking doors and people tell me like my taxes are too high, I'm like, yes, your taxes are too high. The corporation's taxes are way too low, because now just regular folks are being expected to shoulder the entire tax burden, while these corporations and developers just get off without having to pay their fair share. And so the council knows that I fight really hard about these things and that I speak very honestly about these things because I'm one of the few people in the city who's not taking real estate money and landlord money. And so they conspired to keep me off the council and appointed Sakima McClinton again, but we're just going to beat her again like we did in 2021. And we're going to go win this election and we're going to prove that democratic socialism can win in the city of Poughkeepsie, and that, that someone who's running this former Republican, this is not what the ward wants, and not what people care about. So Aaron jokingly calls Ward 8 woke Ward 8 because we have a lot of like former professors who live here, and a lot of like current professors, and a lot of just like really left liberals, right? And I love them, and they care about all of these like values, like Black Lives Matter, and they're worried about climate change, and they want to stop Trump. And the thing that I want to communicate to them through this campaign is like the way to get those values enacted is like through democratic socialism, because the Democratic Party is so tied to corporate donors that it's not actually going to fight for those things that these well-meaning liberals care about, right? And so that's one of the exciting things about this campaign, is that we're like speaking to people who do actually have these values.
If I didn't already know Daniel, and I wasn't even a socialist and I wasn't a DSA member, but I heard him on this episode, and I heard how extraordinarily passionate he was about city government and how many things that he knew about city government, and mentioned everything there was to know about local policy and local issues and that bridge over there and this history. I would be like, even if I was like a conservative Democrat, I would be like, you know what, this guy he deserves it. This guy clearly knows, cares, is built for the job. I couldn't imagine electing someone else. Well,
one of the things I've been running on is how I've gone to almost every single council meeting for the last 2.5 years, like showing up and speaking out about the issues impacting our city. And when I told one of the Ward 8 residents that, when I told them that I've gone to almost every council meeting for the last 2.5 years, he said, get a life.
Well, you're going to get elected. That's the life you're going to get.
It's sad that electeds aren't excited to see citizens who are deeply involved.
I know Dan mentioned his website. So my website is Martinez4, F-O-R, Newburgh. There's an H at the end, .com. And my social media is also Martinez for Newburgh on Instagram, and on Facebook I'm as Councilmember Giselle Martinez. Dan is amazing. I think working with Dan has, the selfish part of me is like, oh man, I miss him as my campaign manager. But also the, supportive and like excited part is that we're going to have another socialist in office, and I am excited because we're expanding. Whether it's Orange County, Dutchess County, and Kingston, we're making a presence known here. And I can't wait until our chapter just starts running even more. Like we start taking over the councils or assembly seats, Senate seats. It's going to be great.
Indeed. And if you're listening, I highly recommend going up, not upstate, going up on the train to a canvas. I'm a famous canvas hater, and one of the reasons I hate canvassing is that you barely talk to anyone. When I went to a canvas for Vanessa, oh gosh, I forget her last name. Yes.
I think it's Agudeo. Yes.
There we go. When I went up to canvas for her in Peekskill, she was one of our DSA endorsed candidates for state assembly here in the state. I was shocked at how many people answered the door. Everyone was home. Everyone answered the door. Half of the people who spoke to me who liked her were like, oh, do you want a drink? Do you want to come in? I'll give you some lemonade. It was an excellent experience. I highly recommend it. That could happen for you if you're canvassing for Giselle or Daniel. And so you should take the train up the river.
What do we call it? Going up north. Moving our bodies up the state.
I keep saying ups up there, and you can feel. And I thought this was, by the way, this is fun. I hope we get the sound to put this in. There was this. I thought it was a song. Turns out it was just someone on TikTok doing like a brief 3-second cover of a song, and it was like, "And when I'm back in Poughkeepsie, I feel it." And it has like a video of Poughkeepsie when she's singing out her balcony.
And when I'm back in Poughkeepsie, I feel it. Yeah!
Thank you both so much for being here. It was really such a pleasure.
Thanks for doing this great work in the Mid-Hudson Valley. That's a term we can all agree to.
Yes.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. This was really exciting opportunity, and there's so many exciting electoral races going on all over. I'm really rooting for Zoran, and I really think that he can win, and I think we're showing that socialism can be back in municipal governance again, and really make a difference in working class people's lives and do big things.
Let's make it a reality. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
I'm Scott.
I'm Susan.
And
solidarity forever.